Today, we are talking about cognitive load in real classrooms, how students are maybe trying to think too hard or not thinking hard enough, and what STEM teachers can do and STEM educators can do to to encourage them to think and to address not be afraid of those challenges. Before we dive into our questions, uh, a reminder, this is sponsored by chemvantage.org, which offers chemistry questions right inside your LMS, like Canvas. And my name is Rich, and I'm here with my partner, Chuck White, and we'll jump into the questions. Anything you want to add, Chuck, before we dive in?
Oh, happy to be with you today, Rich.
What exactly is cognitive load and how does it manifest as a challenge for students?
Well, I remember a long time ago when I was teaching, I put a cartoon on the cover of one of my exams, and it pictured a student in a classroom raising his hand and says, "May I please be excused? My brain is full." And that really uh, exemplifies cognitive load. Students' brains can be full for many reasons. One is that the subject may actually be intrinsically difficult. I took a course one time on magnetohydrodynamics, and my brain was full almost immediately. Um, but it could be due to poor instructional design, or it could be due to the mental effort that's required for deep processing and building lasting understanding. So there are many sources of cognitive load, and all of them are working together to confound students in a learning environment.
Thanks. Yeah, I sometimes worry about I don't have students anymore. I used to have many hundreds, but now I watch my kids at school, and sometimes they'll complain about that extrinsic load where where the assignment is confusing or it feels like busy work, and they're doing all this work and they just don't feel like the value is there. Of course, these are kids. So the other type is the Germane load you were mentioning, where it's just the subject matter, or the intrinsic subject matter that they're trying to master. And of course, they're kids, so they don't have any appreciation. I'm sure we've all heard the "When am I going to use this in the real world?" complaint.
Right. I've complained about that myself.
Interesting. Next question. What are the clearest signs in a STEM classroom that a student's cognitive load has exceeded their capacity?
I'm sorry, what was the question? No, I'm just
This
kidding.
seems
I'm
like
just
I'm not sure I like this question.
I'm just kidding. So, when you're in a classroom and a student is disengaged, you ask them a question and they suddenly look up from their phone and they say, "I'm sorry, what was the question?" You know that they've reached the overload period for one reason or another. And yeah, in a classroom setting, disengagement, either visually or mentally, is the clearest sign.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of this question. When the student's cognitive load has exceeded their capacity, I'm thinking about weightlifting. And when you're trying to build muscle, the quickest way to build muscle is to push your capacity to its very edges. And I'm wondering if it's the same thing with learning. It's good to think deeply and it's good to think as hard as you can and to spend lots of time on a single problem. I believe that it helps you practice deep thinking and hard effort. What's your take on that?
It's true, and I encourage students to try to think deeply all the time. But the problem, especially these days, is that we're in competition with their phones, which are designed to distract them from whatever they're supposed to be doing. And so the question might be, what are the clearest signs in a STEM classroom that a student has been distracted into another direction? So um, measurement of cognitive load is difficult when there are these distractions in their pockets and on their desks.
I like that. And I think that's more attention. Maybe their attention is just they can't think about something any longer.
Right.
And then I think a break, frequent breaks, I think are harmless so long
Absolutely.
as they don't become the distractions you're talking about.
No, it's better than harmless. I think the right kind of break can reinforce teaching and knowledge acquisition.
I like that. Moving on, can teachers unintentionally increase cognitive load through common instructional practices? And what are the most common culprits?
Well, as an administrator for many years, I used to hear student complaints about instructors who had heavy accents. And here, the increase in cognitive load is basically the student trying to understand the words that an instructor is speaking when they have a heavy accent. And so, I mean, sometimes this comes across as racist or something like that. But really, the increase in cognitive load is real. Now, setting that aside, um, uh, when a teacher is talking while writing on the board, if they're facing the board instead of facing the students while they're talking, then that makes the communication more difficult. Communication happens on many levels. There's, of course, the words that reach your ears, but also the facial expressions and the micro expressions that help the overall understanding. So if a teacher isn't facing students when they're talking, then that also increases this extrinsic load. Um, the um, and also, well, I remember a story back when I was in college. I had an instructor who would um, speak while facing the board, and then while writing on the board with his right hand, he would then move to the right so that everything on the board that he had just written was blocked while he was talking. And then he would eventually move enough so that you could read what was on the board, but by that time his voice had moved on to another subject. And so you'd had not only this spatial disconnect, but a temporal disconnect as well. And
Uh,
it was just awful. I remember complaining bitterly about that.
yeah, and it
What about
still
you?
happens today with the whiteboard.
Oh yeah,
Um, a lot of teachers believe the screens are they prefer the whiteboard over a digital screen. I'm the opposite. When I taught, I never touched the whiteboard, mainly because my handwriting was embarrassing. So I would type or draw on the computer instead of the whiteboard.
yeah,
Um, I was thinking about the one teacher. Instead of she would explain mathematical problems, algebra,
mhm,
and she would use the overhead projector with a marker, with an erasable marker, and it was so easy to see, and she would never block it, of course. It was nice and big, so even the students in the back could use it. And so maybe those are two good alternatives for blocking the backboard when using that overhead projector or using a screen, a shared screen and a computer.
right. The overhead projector was good because you could face your audience while talking, while writing and talking, and so you'd get the two things at the same time. The
Yeah.
advantage of writing, whether it's on a whiteboard or a blackboard or an overhead projector, is that it slows you down. I think people have a tendency to go too fast if everything is pre-prepared digitally, and you can exceed students' cognitive load that way as well.
Interesting. So going back to the question about unintentionally increasing that cognitive load, I think one common practice or a culprit is when a teacher talks too long without enough pauses.
Hmm.
And I've caught myself doing this too. When you're explaining something challenging, it takes a lot of work, and it's easy to drone on minute after minute after minute. But I believe in order to understand something, I need seconds of silence in there so I can catch up in my brain and I can say, okay, this teacher just said something and I didn't follow it. What did they mean? And during that silence, your brain can piece it together and catch up, but not if the teacher just keeps talking on and on and on.
Exactly. And even if you got it, those few seconds allow you to review it and help to cement that knowledge in your brain, at least in midterm memory.
I like that. Yeah, when I try not to ever lecture. One of my personal rules with teaching is to not talk for more than 30 seconds without stopping myself and asking a question
Hmm.
to the students. And when I do, I fail at it all the time. 30 seconds is not a long time. But when I do state that question back to the students, sometime when I was earlier in my teaching years, it was very uncomfortable. The silence I would get after I asked a question. And the famous movie Bueller, anyone?
Yeah,
Bueller?
right. Yeah.
No, let the that silence is golden. Let use that silence to let it sink in and let your question sink in and let everyone catch up.
Yeah.
Anything else about unintentional cognitive loads?
I hated that silence. So I never waited for anybody to volunteer. I would pick on somebody to answer a question, but sometimes, they were deer in the headlights, and I wouldn't press him. I would say, you can ask the person next to you, or you can, call your mom, or you can. I gave him lots of options, and so I might, go down an entire row of students until I found somebody who was willing to try to answer the question. And that does two things. One is it lets everybody know that there's no huge amount of pressure on individual student to answer the question. You can just blow it off and say, I don't know. But also, it um, uh, it makes everyone else in the room ask themselves, what would I answer because I might be called on next? And so there's a break. The students get to think about what you were just talking about and formulate their own answer to a question, everyone, even though you really only ask one student at a time.
Interesting technique. I like it. Yeah, very interesting topic, that unintentionally increasing cognitive load.
Mhm.
Cool. Moving on, how can we diagnose if a student's struggle is due to high extrinsic load, which is poor instruction and design, versus high germane load, which is the actual effort and the difficulty?
I think the only thing that you can really tell in a classroom is when students shut down, and you don't know why. So to really distinguish between these two types of cognitive loads requires feedback from the student. It could be verbal feedback, or it could be um, a survey at the end of the class or whatever. But if the student is asking questions about the instructions or the mechanics, what do I do? Then probably the load is mostly due to poor design. But if the student is struggling to find the why, I mean, you mentioned um, a moment ago, what am I ever going to use this for? Or if they're attempting to relate the subject to things that they already know, other things, then probably the load is germane, and that's great because what the student is doing is taking a more or less abstract concept and tying it to concrete experiences. And so that's really what you want to shoot for, the good design, and then have students really spend that cognitive load cementing and reinforcing the concepts in the context of things that they already know. What do you think?
I completely agree. I want them to get lost. I think when you forget about the extrinsic load, the instructional design, and you're focused on the subject matter, you can get lost in a subject. And I've done that in some of my work and in years ago in college, where you forget about the assignment and instead almost all of your attention is on the subject matter.
Mhm.
I love that. That to me, that sounds like the ideal learning activity. I'm thinking of some of the blockers and some of the, why can't every learning activity be like this? And I'm thinking it's in the complaints. Very often, especially when I create a course for the first time and I'm administering the course for the first time, I would get a lot of, they sound like whining. You know, the classic one is, what time of day? You know, you said this is due on May 8th, but
Mhm.
what time of day? And what if I'm in a different time zone?
Mhm.
That that would bug the heck out of me. Or how long does, how many words does my essay have to be is another common one.
Is
Or
this going to
how
be on
many
the exam?
pages?
Do I have permission to forget this?
Or yeah, is this going to be on the test? Yeah,
Right.
that's those are not those questions bug the heck out of me. But I think as I refine the assignment criteria and the rubric, then we get that stuff out of the way. You know, we resolve that in the students' minds
Mhm.
and help them focus on the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not easy to do. I think crafting a learning activity that's interesting, that's organically interesting,
Yeah.
and not, so that those complaints get out of the student's head. That's a really tough challenge.
Hmm. Yep.
Cool. Let's continue. What are the practical minute by minute strategies a teacher can use to chunk or sequence material to minimize extraneous cognitive load?
I really love what you mentioned a moment ago about not talking for more than 30 seconds. I confess that when I was teaching, I would go a lot more than 30 seconds. But I tried to stop at least 5 times in a 1 hour class to change the pace, to ask questions most frequently, to pause and reflect, to restate what we just learned, to reinforce the content, anything that uh, allows the brain to just relax a little bit and still stay on task, not go off and do something completely different, but just pause to allow that new knowledge to sink in a little bit. I think that really helps to minimize the extraneous cognitive load.
I like that. I the way I try to do that same goal that you're describing was make a rule or a guideline for my for during class. 20 minutes, 20-minute activity durations. Usually my classes, each session was an hour and a half in time. This was college students with undergrad students. So I would say, okay, we're going to do 20 minutes on this, then 20 minutes on that, then 20 minutes on something else. And I think that it gets tiring, right? 20 minutes, I think maybe nowadays it's more like 5 minutes, but I
Mhm.
think the students get tired of doing the same thing after a certain amount of time.
Right.
I was also thinking, I think the average student also gets tired throughout the entire class. So maybe, I don't think I ever did this, but it occurred to me. Maybe you do the harder stuff at the very start and then save the more relaxing activities like a video or something at the end. What do you think? Did you ever do that?
I never did that. No, I never. I had a certain amount of stuff that I was committed to covering, and so I pretty much went through it linearly. Um, but never tried to front load the class session with the more difficult material. Interesting idea.
Yeah. I don't know. I never tried. What about breaks? Did you give students breaks?
I didn't give them breaks in terms of, encouraging them to leave the classroom, but we did change pace by doing different kinds of activities. So one of my favorite activities was doing a class poll. You can use clickers for this, or there are ways to actually, ChemVantage has a tool called Class Poll that allows you to do a clicker-like activity, but without clickers. And I would ask students to work in groups of two or three, and so they would get together and talk with their fellow students about a question that I would pose in a poll. And that was a different form of learning, peer instruction, actually, which is great. And so it gave them a chance to stay on the subject, but in a different way. And I think that's one of the ways that you can help students to minimize extraneous cognitive load.
Very cool. I like how you were very subtle about mentioning ChemVantage. Everyone listening should go use ChemVantage in your chemistry classes.
It's a great tool.
Well done. One more question. Oh, before we jump into the next question, this the our talk about breaks made me chuckle, remembering a class. I once started a class at 8:30 p.m. It was a 2.5 hour class, and it was only once a week.
That
This,
that is just awful. I mean, there is no other word for it. It's just awful. Uh, Anybody who thinks they can teach the same amount of material in one 2.5 hour class versus three 50-minute classes spread out over a week is just fooling themselves. It just cannot be done. Sorry.
oh, it was awful. I don't know how that class got created in the first place, but man, you're just cheating the students when you do that. But
Yes.
yeah, I wouldn't normally take breaks with the 1.5 hour class, but the 2.5 hour class, yeah, we took breaks.
You have to. You really do.
Oh, I'm getting tired just thinking about that class. Uh, one more. How can a teacher use retrieval practice or pre-testing to offload intrinsic load, ensuring prerequisite knowledge is activated without overwhelming the student? Ooh,
Well,
tough one.
uh, it depends, I think, on the context. In a classroom, I think by taking breaks, asking questions, and skipping around the room, so every student will be prepared to answer a question that you pose. Um, that causes every student to think about the question and decide what or try to decide what their answer might be. That sort of retrieval process happens in short-term memory because you've just been talking about this in the previous 5 minutes. Um, on a longer term, you can. I'm a big believer in practice exams. So I uh, almost always gave students the ability to have a practice exam at home before they came and took an in-person exam in the classroom. And I would encourage students to take the practice exams. Some of them wouldn't. They figured it was extra work. Maybe they were, completely confident that they would do well on the exam. But the ones who took the practice exams really got practice in retrieving that knowledge and applying it to a problem that they were asked on a practice exam. I used to give extra credit for completing practice exams just to incentivize this process. So, um, yeah, it depends on the context, but I think you have to do it both in the moment in the classroom and for the longer term.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think my subjects were quite different than yours. I never taught a hard science, but I taught one class that comes to mind was the capstone class. And this was the last programming class a student had to take before they graduated, an undergrad student. And it was a 2 semester class. And there were some concepts, but they were very easy, uh, commonsensical. They just made sense
Mhm.
in your head the first time you heard it. So the way I would try to practice these idea of retrieval practice, to help them recover. They know the stuff, but we want to help them retrieve it and bring it to the forefront of their mind.
Right.
We would do in this class, we would do 100% projects. And
Mm.
I think in those projects, we would also discuss the concepts and say, just talk casually about how the challenges and the victories, what worked and what doesn't work when
Right.
you're trying to produce a software application and publish a software application.
Right.
Interesting.
Yep. Well, this has been fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. This was a really interesting topic and a really challenging one. Uh, Anyone listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what can we do to maximize our effectiveness with the cognitive loads and help the students strengthen those muscles, strengthen the attention muscles and the ability to think about a problem for very deep thinking for a long time. And also a reminder that chemvantage.org offers affordable, high quality LTI homework, quizzes, and assignment apps for general chemistry. Thank you. Have a good day.
Enjoyed it.